I am Darius, and I have $85 million sitting in a blind trust that no one knows about. But tonight, I am standing in the rain outside a five-star steakhouse in Atlanta because my own mother just had security throw me out. She thinks I am a broke history teacher begging for rent money. She has no idea that I could buy this entire restaurant block with cash and still have enough left over to buy her precious social club. Before I tell you how I taught my bougie family a lesson they will never forget, let me know where you are watching from. In the comments, hit like and subscribe. If you have ever had to hide your true value from people who should have loved you unconditionally. The night that changed everything started with the scent of expensive cigars and even more expensive perfume. It was my mother Viola's 65th birthday, and she had rented out the entire private dining wing of the Prime Rib in Buckhead. This was not just a dinner, it was a coronation. My mother is a retired university dean who cares more about the appearance of black excellence than actual human decency. The room was filled with doctors, lawyers, and politicians. The kind of crowd that judges you by the stitching on your shoes before they even look you in the eye. I pulled up to the valet stand in my rusted 2012 Toyota Corolla. The valet looked at my car with open disdain, asking if I was making a delivery. I ignored him and handed over the keys, my heart pounding against my ribs. I was wearing my old teaching suit, the one with the fraying cuffs and the shine on the elbows from years of grading papers. I had better clothes now. Of course I had designer suits hanging in the closet of the estate. I had secretly purchased 3 weeks ago, but tonight was a test. The final test. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors and the air conditioning hit me like a wall of ice. The private room was a sea of silk dresses and tailored tuxedos. Laughter tinkled like broken glass. I spotted my family at the head table. Yet my mother sat on a velvet throne, looking like royalty. Next to her was my older brother Terrence, a venture capitalist who thinks net worth is the same thing as self-worth, and hanging onto his arm was Jessica, my sister-in-law. Jessica saw me first. She did not smile, she did not wave, she just wrinkled her nose as if she had smelled something rotting. She intercepted me before I could even reach my mother. Jessica is the kind of woman who uses politeness as a weapon. She placed a manicured hand on my chest, stopping me in my tracks. "Darius," she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "Did you get lost on the way to the staff entrance? Or are those actually the shoes you decided to wear to your mother's milestone celebration?" I looked down at my scuffed loafers. "I am here to celebrate Mom, just like everyone else, Jessica." She laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "Look at you. You look like you are about to ask for a handout. Please, try not to stand too close to the investors Terrence is trying to impress. We do not want them thinking this is a charity event." I swallowed my pride and pushed past her. I needed to do this. I approached the head table. My mother Viola did not even look up from her menu. She was busy complaining to the waiter that her water did not have enough lemon. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said softly. She finally looked at me. Her eyes swept over my outfit, dissecting every flaw. "You are late, Darius, and you look disheveled. I hope you did not bring a gift. I do not have room in the car for any dollar store trinkets tonight." The table chuckled. Terrence smirked, swirling his cognac. I took a deep breath. "I did not bring a gift. Mom, actually, I need to talk to all of you." I tapped a spoon against a glass. The room went quiet. All eyes were on me. The disappointment of the family, the history teacher who never made 6 figures. "I am sorry to interrupt the celebration," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "but I have run out of options. My landlord is evicting me tomorrow because the building is being renovated. My car transmission died on the way here. I am asking you, my family, for help. I need a loan of $5,000 just to secure a new apartment and fix the car. I promise I will pay it back with interest." The silence that followed was suffocating. I looked from face to face, hoping to see a flicker of empathy. I saw none. Terrence was the first to speak. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me like I was a bug. he wanted to crush. $5,000. Darius, that is literally the price of the bottle of wine we just finished. You want me to liquidate a vintage Bordeaux so you can pay rent in whatever hood you are living in now. I cannot invest in a liability. Darius, and you are a liability. I looked at my mother. Mom, please, I have nowhere else to go. Viola set down her napkin. She looked around the room, seeing her friends whispering, seeing the judgment in their eyes. She was not worried about my safety. She was worried about her reputation. You have some nerve, she hissed her, voice low and dangerous. You come into my party looking like a beggar and ask for money in front of the mayor's wife. I told you that teaching job was a dead end. I told you to go to law school like your brother, but you wanted to save the community. Well, look at you now. You cannot even save yourself. Jessica chimed in, swirling the olive in her martini. Maybe you should pick up a second job. Darius, I hear Uber is always hiring, you know. People like you are usually very natural at driving and service jobs. It might be a better fit than pretending to be an intellectual. The insult was sharp and loaded, but I ignored it. I looked at them one last time, so the answer is no. You will let your son, your brother, be homeless over $5,000. We are teaching you a lesson, Darius Terrence said, grinning. It is called tough love. Sink or swim. Little brother? Then, my mother did the unthinkable. She did not just say no. She raised her hand and signaled the manager, a man named Brad who was Terrence's college drinking buddy. Brad. Darling, she called out. I think this guest is confused. He seems to have crashed the wrong party. He is disturbing the atmosphere. Could you please escort him out? My blood ran cold. You are kicking me out. You are not adding value. Darius, you are subtracting from it, my mother said, turning her back to me. Leave now before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. Brad and two large security guards materialized behind me. One of them grabbed my arm. Let's go, buddy. Do not make a scene, Brad sneered. I pulled my arm away. Do not touch me. I am leaving. I looked at my family. They were already laughing again, clinking their crystal glasses, toasting to their success and their cruelty. They thought this was the end of the conversation. They thought they had just put the family failure in his place. They had no idea that the man walking out the door was worth more than everyone in that room combined, and they definitely did not know that this was just the beginning of the reckoning. I walked out into the humid Atlanta night. The valet watched me pass my car and keep walking. I walked 2 blocks down the street until I was out of sight. Then I pulled out my burner phone and dialed a number. Bring the car around, I said. I am ready to go home. A moment later, a blacked-out SUV pulled up to the curb. My driver stepped out and opened the door. Good evening, Mr. Brooks, where to? Take me to the estate, I said, sinking into the leather seats, and get my lawyer on the phone. I have some changes to make to my will. As we drove away, I looked back at the glowing windows of the restaurant. I had my answer. Now it was time for the next phase of the test. I needed to call the only person who hadn't been at that table tonight. My little sister, Nia. The heavy oak doors of the restaurant slammed shut behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest, and the cold rain immediately soaked through the thin fabric of my cheap suit jacket. As Brad's security guards released my arms with a shove that nearly sent me sprawling onto the wet pavement. They dusted their hands off as if they had just taken out the trash, and I stood there for a moment in the downpour, watching through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows as my mother threw her head back in laughter at something Jessica said, while Terrence raised his glass in a toast that was likely celebrating the removal of the family stain. I turned my collar up against the wind and started walking away from the valet stand, where my rusted Corolla sat ignored, and I walked past the line of luxury cars, knowing that the valet wouldn't even look at me, let alone retrieve my vehicle without a ticket. I didn't have money to tip him anyway, so I kept walking toward the bus stop at the end of the block, my heart beating a rhythm of pure, unadulterated rage mixed with a grief so profound it felt like I was bleeding internally. As I reached the corner, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided silently to the curb beside me, its windows tinted so dark they looked like voids in the night, and the rear door swung open, revealing a cream leather interior that cost more than my mother's entire house. My driver, James, stepped out, holding a large umbrella to shield me from the rain, and said, "Good evening, Mr. Brooks, right on time." As always, I slid into the back seat and the heavy door latched shut instantly, cutting off the noise of the city and the chill of the rain, leaving me in a cocoon of silence and luxury. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes, letting the mask of the broke history teacher slip away for the first time that night. It had been exactly 60 days since my life changed forever. I remembered standing in that gas station on a Tuesday evening, buying a ginger ale and a bag of chips, after a long day of teaching, when I decided on a whim to buy a single lottery ticket. I didn't even check the numbers until 3 days later, when I was sitting in the staff lounge grading papers and realized the numbers on my screen matched the crumpled slip of paper in my wallet. I remembered the meeting with the lawyers at a firm that specialized in high net worth individuals, where I signed the papers to create the blindness trust that would claim the prize on my behalf, ensuring my name never appeared in the newspapers. And I remembered the moment I opened my banking app and saw the pending deposit clear, changing my balance from $400 to $85 million in the blink of an eye. That money was supposed to be freedom. It was supposed to be the tool I would use to lift my family up, to pay off my mother's mortgage, to fund Terrence's business ideas, to pay for Nia's medical school. But I knew my family. I knew they worshipped status above all else. So I had decided to wait to test them, to see if they loved Darius, the person, or Darius, the bank account. And tonight, I had gotten my answer loud and clear. James drove us away from the city lights toward the private airfield where my helicopter was waiting to take me to the secluded estate I had purchased under an LLC. The ride was smooth and quiet, giving me time to think about the scene in the restaurant. I pulled out my phone and looked at the family group chat where Jessica had already posted a photo of the dinner with the caption, "Perfect night with the best family, minus the drama." We arrived at the estate, a sprawling modern fortress of glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the city lights. And I walked into the massive living room where the only piece of decor I had brought from my old life sat on the mantel. It was a framed photograph of us from 20 years ago, back when my father was still alive, and we were just a normal family, before the obsession with money and status poisoned everything. I poured myself a glass of scotch that cost more than my monthly teaching salary and stared at that photo, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. I had given them a chance in person, and they had failed spectacularly. But part of me, the part that still remembered Terrence teaching me how to ride a bike, needed to be absolutely sure. I needed to know there was no redemption left for them. I pulled out my burner phone, the one they all had the number for, and sat down on the Italian leather sofa, staring at the city skyline below me. I dialed Terrence's number, knowing he would pick up because he loved to gloat. The phone rang 3 times before he answered, and the background noise of the party was loud and chaotic. "I am listening, loser." Terrence's voice came through the speaker, thick with alcohol and arrogance. "What do you want to beg for now? Are you calling to ask if you can eat the leftovers from the plates we just cleared because we already sent them back to the kitchen?" I gripped the phone tighter as the sounds of the party filtered through the line, and I forced my voice to sound small and desperate, even though I was sitting in a room worth more than Terrence's entire investment portfolio. I told him, "Look, Terrence, I am not asking for a handout anymore. I just need a roof over my head for 2 or 3 days until I can get my deposit back from the landlord. I will sleep on the sofa. I will be gone before you and Jessica even wake up in the morning. Just please do not let your brother sleep on the street tonight." There was a pause, and I heard Terrence cover the mouthpiece, but not well enough because I could hear him whispering to Jessica that I was begging to crash at their place. And then I heard the distinct click of heels on hardwood as Jessica snatched the phone away from him. Her voice came through crystal clear, and it was dripping with that fake concern that always masked her deep-seated prejudice. "Darius," she said, and I could practically see her curling her lip. "We have discussed this before. We simply cannot have a man in your situation staying in our home around the children. You know how easily germs spread in those environments you are living in, and honestly, we do not know what kind of influences or habits you might bring into our safe space. We have to think about the safety of our property and our kids first. I am sure you understand that we cannot risk having things go missing or having the neighbors see a homeless man coming and going. It just does not fit the image we are trying to maintain for the homeowners association." The microaggression hit me like a physical slap. She was talking about me, her husband's brother, as if I were a diseased stray animal. She was afraid would soil her expensive carpets. She did not see a human being in need. She saw a stereotype, a threat to her manicured suburban existence. And the saddest part was that Terrence let her say it. I waited for my brother to defend me, to tell his wife that I was family, and that I wasn't a criminal, just because I was a teacher who had hit a rough patch. But instead, Terrence came back on the line laughing, as if Jessica had just told a hilarious joke. "She is right, little brother," Terrence said, his voice slurring slightly from the expensive cognac he was drinking. "Look, if you are that desperate for cash, there are other options. You have got 2 kidneys, don't you? Or you could go down to the plasma center on 4th Street. I hear they pay $50 for a pint, or maybe sign up for those medical drug trials. I mean, your body is not doing anything useful anyway. Might as well let them test some experimental drugs on you. At least then, you would be contributing to society instead of leeching off the successful members of this family." The cruelty was breathtaking. It was so casual, so easy for him to suggest, "I sell my own blood or become a lab rat," rather than offer me a blanket on his sofa. I felt a cold calm settle over me. The last thread of loyalty I held for my brother snapped in that moment. "Is that your final answer, Terrence?" I asked, my voice steady and devoid of the pleading tone I had used moments before. "Yeah, that is my final answer," Terrence scoffed. "Now lose my number, Darius, and do not show your face at the estate in Martha's Vineyard this summer. We do not want you embarrassing us in front of the partners." I ended the call without another word and immediately pressed the save button on the recording app I had running the audio. File saved instantly, a digital tombstone for our brotherhood. I set the phone down on the Italian marble coffee table and picked up the red leather folder that contained my preliminary will and trust documents. I uncapped my fountain pen and flipped to the section detailing the distribution of assets. With a steady hand, I drew a thick black line through Terrence's name, and then for good measure, I drew another line through the trust fund I had planned to set up for his and Jessica's children. I would not fund the lifestyle of people who treated me like a disease. I watched the ink dry, feeling a strange mixture of grief and liberation. They had made their choice, and now they would have to live with it when the time came. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the vast darkness of my estate. The silence of the house felt heavy now, not with loneliness, but with the weight of the truth I had just uncovered. I had one person left to call, one last hope that my family was not completely rotten to the core. I picked up the phone again and scrolled to the contact saved, as baby sis Nia was the youngest of us, the one who had always looked at me with adoration, even when the rest of the world looked away. She was in her final year of medical school, drowning in loans and stress. But she had never once treated me like a failure. I stared at her name for a long moment, terrified that she too might reject me, that the poison of our mother's ambition might have infected her as well. But I had to know. I took a deep breath and pressed dial, listening to the ringback tone echo in the empty room, praying that at least one person in my bloodline had a heart that wasn't made of stone. The phone rang 4 times before Naya picked up, and the sound of her voice was thick with exhaustion, like she had been studying for 30 hours straight. I could hear the crinkle of a cheap instant noodle wrapper in the background and the rustle of heavy textbook pages turning. She was probably sitting on the floor of her cramped dorm room surrounded by medical diagrams and unpaid bills, eating sodium-packed sludge because it was all she could afford while trying to become a doctor to save lives. "Hey, big brother," she said, and her voice was a warm balm after the icy rejection of the rest of the family. "I am just going over organic chemistry. What is going on? Are you okay? You never call this late?" I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat feeling like a stone. I had to stick to the script. I had to know the truth. I told her, "Nia, I am in trouble, bad trouble. Mom kicked me out of the party. Terrence won't help me. I have nowhere to sleep and my car is dead. I need help, just anything you can spare." There was a silence on the other end, but it wasn't the cold, calculated silence of my mother or the mocking silence of my brother. It was a silence filled with sudden, terrifying panic. I heard her drop her fork, and her breath hitched in a sob. "Darius, oh my God, where are you? Are you safe? I do not have a car here or I would come get you right now," she stammered, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. "Look, I am negative in my checking account right now until my financial aid drops next week and I have $60,000 in student loans looming over my head. But I have my emergency savings." She didn't ask why I was broke. She didn't lecture me about my career choices. She didn't tell me to go sell my blood. She just immediately started calculating what she could sacrifice. "I have $1,200 saved up for next semester's books and the deposit on an apartment for residency," she said, her voice shaking, but determined. "It is literally every cent I have managed to scrape together from tutoring, but I am sending it to you right now. Do you have Zelle open?" "Nia, no." I started to say, the guilt hitting me like a physical blow. That was her lifeline, her future books. I could not take that from her. But she cut me off. "Hush, Darius. You are my brother. You carried me on your shoulders when I was 5. You bought me ice cream. When Mom put us on diets, you are the only one who ever told me I was smart enough to be a doctor. I am sending it." My phone pinged a second later, a notification from the bank telling me that $1,200 had been deposited into my account, leaving Nia with exactly $0 to her name. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring. "It is not enough, though," she whispered. "I know it is not enough to fix a car and get an apartment in Atlanta." "Wait. Darius, do not hang up. I have an idea." I heard the sound of a closet door opening and the rustling of fabric. "What are you doing, Nia?" I asked, my grip on the phone tightening. "I am getting the bag," she said. "The vintage Chanel bag Dad gave me for my 16th birthday before he passed. It is the only nice thing I own. The only thing Mom and Jessica haven't made fun of me for wearing. But it is worth something, Darius. I know there is a 24-hour pawn shop down on 4th Street near the campus. If I run, I can get there before the shift change." "Nia, do not do that. That is Dad's gift," I shouted, but she was already moving. I could hear her footsteps pounding down the hallway of her dorm, the heavy door slamming shut behind her. "It is just a bag. Darius, you are my brother. I am not letting you sleep on the street. Not while I have breath in my body. Stay on the line. I am running." I sat there in my multi-million-dollar mansion, listening to my little sister run through the dangerous streets of the city at night, clutching a handbag that represented her last connection to our father's love. She was panting, her breath coming in short gasps. But she didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She ran past the late-night crowds, past the danger driven by a love so pure it burned. I heard the bell of the pawn shop door chime. I heard her voice fierce and pleading, negotiating with the broker, telling him she needed cash. Now, not a loan, not a ticket, but a sale because her brother was in crisis. I heard her accept $800, a fraction of what the bag was worth, just so she could send it to me instantly. The second ping on my phone was the loudest sound in the world, another $800 added to my balance. $800 that cost my sister her most prized possession. $800 that proved she was the only person in my bloodline worth saving. I hung up the phone as she was walking out of the shop telling me she loved me and that everything would be okay. I sat in the darkness of my estate, and for the first time in years, I wept. Not out of sadness, but out of an overwhelming gratitude and a fierce protective rage. I looked at the transfer notifications glowing on my screen, and I made a vow right then and there. Nia had given me her everything she had, stripped herself bare to keep me warm. She thought she was saving a broke teacher, but she had just invested in a king, and I swore on my father's grave that I would return her investment 1,000 times over. I would give her the world. I would buy her the hospital she wanted to work in. I would fill her closet with Chanel until she drowned in silk. But first I had to finish the game. I had to expose the rot in the rest of our family, so that when I lifted Nia up, they couldn't drag her back down. The morning sun filtered through the silk drapes of my mother's master bedroom in Atlanta as she stood before her open walk-in closet, directing the housekeeper on exactly which linen caftans to pack for the upcoming summer season at Martha's Vineyard. She held up a white, wide-brimmed hat and admired herself in the full-length mirror, practicing the wave she would give to the envious neighbors as our car pulled into the driveway of the family's legacy estate. On the island, I simply cannot wait to see the look on Shirley's face when she sees the new landscaping. Viola said, her voice dripping with the anticipation of social dominance. She has been bragging about her son's promotion all year, but nothing compares to owning prime real estate on the vineyard. It separates the truly established families from the new money riffraff. Make sure you pack the vintage Louis Vuitton trunks. They look best when the bellhops unload them. The front door downstairs slammed with a violence that shook the crystal chandelier in the hallway, and heavy, frantic footsteps pounded up the stairs. My mother frowned, adjusting her pearl necklace. Annoyed that her fantasy of leisure was being interrupted by noise, Terence burst into the bedroom, and he looked like a man who had just seen a ghost, or perhaps become one. His face, usually smug and well-groomed, was the color of ash, and sweat was beading on his forehead. Despite the air conditioning, he was still wearing yesterday's suit, which was rumpled and stained, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the terrifying piece of paper he was clutching. My mother turned slowly, her expression one of mild irritation. "Terence, what on earth is the matter? You are tracking mud onto my Persian rug, and you look like you have not slept. Have you been drinking before noon again?" "Mom, stop packing." Terence wheezed, leaning against the doorframe as if his legs could no longer support the weight of his own arrogance. "We are not going to the vineyard. Not this summer. Maybe not ever." Viola laughed, a high tinkling sound that grated on the nerves. "Do not be ridiculous. The ferry tickets are already booked, and I have a deposit down on the catering for the welcome party. Now go shower. You smell like fear and failure." "I messed up, Mom. I messed up bad." Terence shouted, his voice cracking, and he threw the crumpled paper onto the bed, right on top of her pristine white hat. My mother picked up the paper with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated, reading the bold red letters stamped across the top. "Notice of foreclosure sale." "What is this?" she asked, her brow furrowing in confusion. "This says the property on Oak Bluffs is being auctioned in 7 days due to default on a secured loan, but the house is paid off. Your father paid it off 20 years ago." "I took it," Terence whispered, and the confession hung in the air like toxic gas. "I took the deed from the safe 6 months ago. I forged your signature and took out a hard money loan against the equity, $2 million. "Mom." Viola froze, her eyes widening to the size of saucers. "You did what? Why would you do that?" Crypto Terence sobbed, sinking to his knees on the carpet. "It was supposed to be a sure thing. The algorithm promised 300% returns in a month. I was going to pay off the loan before you even knew, and pocket the $6 million in profit. I wanted to prove I was a genius investor, better than Dad ever was. But the market crashed. Mom, it all crashed overnight. The wallet is empty. The lender wants their money by next Friday, or they take the house. My mother made a sound like a dying animal, a gasp that sucked all the air out of the room. Her hand flew to her chest, clutching her pearls as the reality of social annihilation hit her. She wasn't thinking about the betrayal or the theft. She was thinking about Shirley and the other women at the club. She was thinking about the shame of losing the crown jewel of her status symbol collection. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed onto the bed in a dead faint, a dramatic heap of silk and despair. It took 10 minutes to revive her, using smelling salts and a cold compress. When her eyes fluttered open, Terence was hovering over her, looking like a terrified child waiting for a beating. I expected her to slap him. I expected her to scream that he was a thief and a liar, that he was no better than the criminals she looked down on. But Viola sat up, adjusting her wig, and looked at her golden boy with eyes full of sorrow. Not anger. She reached out and stroked his cheek, her voice trembling. "Oh, my poor baby," she cooed. "You were just trying to expand the family empire. It is not your fault. The market is rigged against us. Black men have to take risks to get ahead, and sometimes the system just swallows them up. It is the economy, it is the timing, it is just bad luck." She turned her gaze to the window, refusing to look at the foreclosure notice again. "We cannot lose that house. Terence, it is our history, it is my reputation. If word gets out that we are broke, I will be the laughingstock of Atlanta. We need $2 million in 7 days." Jessica had been standing in the hallway listening, and she walked into the room. Now her arms crossed, her face hard and calculating. She didn't care about Terence's feelings. She cared about her Instagram location tags. She knew that without the vineyard content, her follower engagement would tank. "We do not have the liquidity," Jessica said, her voice sharp as a razor. "We are leveraged to the hilt on the cars and the city house, but we do have an asset we haven't tapped yet." Viola looked at her daughter-in-law, hope flickering in her eyes. "What are you talking about? Darius is useless. We already kicked him out." "Not Darius," Jessica sneered, rolling her eyes. "I am talking about Nia." "Nia?" Viola asked, confused. "She is just a student. She has no money. She has a clean credit profile," Jessica explained, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And she is in med school, which means she has high future earning potential. There are private lenders, predatory ones. Sure, but they will lend against future income if the borrower has a spotless record and is desperate enough." Viola hesitated, but Naya is studying for her finals. She wants to be a surgeon. "She can be a surgeon later," Jessica snapped, cutting her off. "Right now, we need to save this family. We can tell her it is a temporary bridge loan. We make her quit school for a year, get a job, to show income and sign for the loan under her name. She is young. She can bounce back from bankruptcy in 7 years. We cannot." Viola looked at the foreclosure notice, then at her weeping son, and finally at the ruthless determination on Jessica's face. The fear of social disgrace won out over maternal instinct, as it always did. "You are right," Viola said, straightening her back and wiping her dry eyes. "Nia has been living off our sacrifices for too long. It is time she stepped up and did her part for this family. Call her. Tell her to come home immediately. Tell her it is a life or death emergency, because for us it is." Nia arrived at the family's main residence in Buckhead. 3 hours later, her eyes red from exhaustion and the strain of the 12-hour shifts she had been pulling at the hospital. She was wearing scrubs and her stethoscope was still around her neck, because Viola had called her, screaming that it was a life or death emergency, involving the family heart. Nia had assumed her mother was having a cardiac event, so she had broken every speed limit to get there, only to find the house silent and dark, except for the library where the 3 of them were waiting, like a tribunal of judges. She walked into the room, and the air was thick with tension and the smell of stale scotch. Terence was pacing back and forth, biting his fingernails down to the quick, while Jessica sat on the leather sofa checking her watch as if she had somewhere better to be. Viola sat in her high-backed armchair, looking like a tragic queen who had just lost her crown. Nia dropped her bag and rushed to her mother asking what happened, and if she needed an ambulance or some aspirin, but Viola just waved her hand dismissively and told her to sit down because they needed to discuss the future of the family legacy. Nia sank onto the edge of the ottoman, confused and terrified, looking from her brother to her mother, waiting for someone to explain why nobody was dying. But everyone looked like they were attending a funeral. Terence finally stopped pacing and threw a stack of documents onto the coffee table in front of her. He didn't look her in the eye when he spoke. His voice was fast and jittery. The voice of a man trying to sell a car with no engine. He told her that there had been a minor complication with the liquidity of the estate and a temporary misunderstanding with the bank regarding the Martha's Vineyard property. He used big financial words to cover up the simple fact that he was a thief and a gambler who had lost everything. Nia picked up the papers and her medical training kicked in. She scanned the lines with clinical precision, cutting through the jargon. She saw the foreclosure notice, she saw the amount owed, and she saw the loan application filled out in her name with an interest rate that was illegal in 30 states. "You want me to sign a high-risk personal loan for $2 million?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "I am a student, Terence. I have negative net worth. I cannot service a debt like this. The monthly payments are more than a surgeon makes in a year." Jessica leaned forward, her face composed and cold like a marble statue. She told Nia that it was just a bridge loan, a formality to keep the wolves at bay until Terence's next deal closed. She said that the lender was willing to overlook Nia's lack of assets because of her high earning potential as a future doctor. But there was a catch, a small condition. The lender required proof of current employment, not just student status. "So here's the plan," Jessica said, as if she were planning a brunch menu. "Instead of destroying a life, you are going to take a leave of absence from medical school. Just for a year or two. You can get a job at a pharmaceutical sales company. My father knows a hiring manager. They pay well with commissions. You use that income to secure the loan and pay the interest until Terence gets back on his feet." Nia stood up so fast, the ottoman tipped over. She looked at them in horror, realization dawning on her. They were asking her to quit her dream 3 months before graduation. They were asking her to become a mule for their debt, to sacrifice her future to save a vacation house. She rarely even got to visit, Nia said, and the word hung in the room like a gunshot. "I am not quitting school. I have my board exams in 2 weeks. I have residency interviews lined up. I have worked too hard for this. I gave Darius everything I had because he needed food and shelter. I will not give you my future, so you can keep a house you cannot afford." Viola stood up, then her eyes flashing with a rage that terrified Nia. She walked over to her daughter, her face twisted with a mixture of panic and entitlement. She told Nia that she was being selfish, that she didn't understand the stakes. She said that the house was not just a building, it was their history, their proof that they belonged in the elite circle. It was the only thing holding their reputation together. "You ungrateful little girl," Viola hissed, stepping into Nia's personal space. "We fed you, we clothed you, we allowed you to pursue this doctor fantasy. And now when the family faces extinction, you want to talk about board exams. Who cares about your little degree if the name on the diploma is mud in this town?" Nia backed away, tears streaming down her face. She tried to explain that becoming a doctor was the only way she could actually help the family in the long run, that destroying her credit and her career now would doom them all. But they weren't listening. They didn't want logic, they wanted a sacrifice. Terence grabbed her arm, his grip painful, desperate. "Please, Nia, you have to do this. They will take everything. If you do not sign, they will put us on the street. Do you want to see your mother in a shelter? Because that is what will happen if you walk out that door." "I can't," Nia sobbed, pulling her arm free. "I won't do it. Ask Darius. He might help, but do not ask me to kill my dream." The mention of Darius was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Viola screamed, a sound of pure frustration and fury. She swung her hand and the slap echoed through the library, a sharp, brutal crack that knocked Nia sideways. She stumbled, falling against the bookshelf, clutching her stinging cheek. "Do not mention that. Failure in this house!" Viola shrieked, standing over her daughter like a vengeful spirit. "You are just like him, selfish, weak, and useless. You think you are better than us because you read books. You are nothing without this family, and if you walk out that door, you are dead to me, just like he is. That house is the honor of this bloodline, and if you are not willing to bleed for it, then you do not have my blood in your veins." Nia looked up at her mother, at the woman who was supposed to protect her, and saw only a stranger consumed by greed and vanity. She realized in that moment that she had never been a daughter to Viola. She had been an investment, an asset to be liquidated when the market turned bad. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing her bag and running for the door. She heard Jessica laughing, a cruel, cold sound, and Terrence calling her name, but she didn't stop. She ran out of the house into the cool night air, gasping for breath as if she were drowning. She fumbled for her keys, her hands shaking. So badly she dropped them on the driveway. She got into her car and locked the doors, driving away blindly until she reached a gas station parking lot 3 miles away. She pulled over and buried her face in her hands, sobbing until her ribs ached. She felt completely alone, an orphan with living parents. She pulled out her phone and dialed the only number she had left. She called Darius, hoping he was okay, hoping he had found a place to stay with the money she sent. She tried to steady her voice to wipe the tears from her face because she couldn't burden him. He was already struggling. He was homeless and broke. She had to be the strong one. The phone rang and Darius picked up on the first ring, his voice calm and steady. "Hey, Nia, what is wrong?" "Nothing," Nia lied, her voice cracking despite her best efforts. "I just wanted to check on you. Did you find a motel? Is the car running?" "I am fine. I just had a long shift, and I am tired. That is all." She bit her lip, tasting blood, trying not to let the sob escape. She didn't tell him about the slap. She didn't tell him about the foreclosure. She didn't tell him that she had just been disowned for refusing to ruin her life. She just wanted to hear his voice, to know that someone in the world loved her without conditions. "I am okay, Darius. I promise," she whispered. "I just love you, big brother. Stay safe. Okay?" She hung up before she broke down completely, sitting alone in the dark parking lot, unaware that she wasn't alone at all. 5 miles away in the command center of his estate, Darius sat in his leather chair staring at a bank of monitors. One of the screens showed the GPS tracker on Nia's car, blinking in the gas station lot. Another screen showed the live feed from the hidden camera he had paid a member of the cleaning staff to install in Viola's library weeks ago. He had seen everything. He had seen the ambush, he had heard the demands, and he had watched his mother strike his sister across the face. His hand was gripping the armrest of his chair so hard, the leather was creaking. His eyes were cold, dark pools of absolute fury. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number that connected directly to his lead attorney, a shark named Mr. Sterling, who was on retainer for exactly this moment. "Sterling," Darius said, his voice low and dangerous. "Initiate Plan B immediately. I want you to call the bank holding the note on the Martha's Vineyard property. Tell them we are buying the debt full value. Cash offer tonight." "But sir," Sterling replied on the other end, "that is a bad asset. The property is underwater." "I do not care about the asset," Darius interrupted. "I am buying the leverage. Get the paperwork ready and contact the private lender Jessica was trying to use. Buy that debt too. I want to own every single cent they owe to anyone, anywhere in Sterling. Yes, Mr. Brooks. When you call them to set up the meeting, tell them the new investor demands a face-to-face signing at the property. Tell them it is their only chance to save the house. Make sure they all go to the island." I hung up the phone and looked at the screen, where Nia was wiping her eyes in her car. They had hurt the only person I cared about. They had slapped her. They had tried to enslave her financial future. Now I wasn't just going to teach them a lesson, I was going to evict them from their lives. Terence sat on the edge of the leather sofa in the darkened library, staring at the empty crystal glass in his hand, and the foreclosure notice that was now stained with a ring of condensation. He had been awake for 36 hours, making frantic calls to every contact in his phone book, begging for a lifeline. But every door had slammed in his face. His so-called friends had suddenly become very busy when they heard the panic in his voice, and the private lenders had laughed at his credit score. He was watching the clock tick down to his total destruction, visualizing the moment the sheriff would arrive to padlock the doors, and the moment his name would become a punchline at the country club. He was ready to give up, to just run away and disappear. When his phone buzzed on the mahogany table, vibrating against the wood, like a warning, he stared at the unknown number, debating whether to answer it, assuming it was another creditor or a lawyer serving papers. But desperation made his hand move. He swiped the screen and brought the phone to his ear, his voice raspy and defensive, asking who was calling. Mr. Brooks. A smooth baritone voice said on the other end, sounding like money and old leather. This is Harrison Sterling, senior partner at Sterling and Vance. We are a private wealth management firm representing a high-net-worth client who has taken a specific interest in your distressed asset portfolio. Specifically the estate on Martha's Vineyard. Terence sat up straighter, his heart hammering against his ribs. He tried to compose himself to sound like the master of the universe. He pretended to be, asking what kind of interest the client had. My client specializes in acquiring legacy properties. Sterling continued, his tone professional and detached. He is aware of the pending foreclosure and the liquidity crisis facing your family. He is willing to step in and purchase the debt in its entirety, effectively stopping the auction and satisfying the bank immediately. Furthermore, he is amenable to a leaseback agreement that would allow your family to retain residency and appearance of ownership for the foreseeable future. Terence nearly dropped the phone. He felt a rush of euphoria so intense it made him dizzy. It was a miracle, it was the divine intervention his mother always talked about. He asked what the catch was, because he knew there was always a catch. The terms are standard for a deal of this magnitude, Sterling said. But my client is very particular about clean titles and liability waivers. He requires a face-to-face closing at the property itself. This coming Saturday, all parties with any potential claim to the family trust must be present to sign the release forms, releasing their rights to the equity in exchange for the debt settlement. That means you, your mother, and all siblings listed on the original deed. Terence did the mental math quickly. That meant him, Viola, and Darius. He didn't even think about Nia because she wasn't on the deed yet, but Darius was. He felt a flicker of annoyance that he would have to deal with his brother again. But it was a small price to pay for salvation. We can do that, Terence stammered, trying to keep the relief out of his voice. We can all be there this Saturday. Excellent, Sterling said. I will have the papers drawn up. My client values punctuality, Mr. Brooks. Do not disappoint him. The line went dead, and Terence let out a scream of victory that echoed through the silent house. He ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time, bursting into Viola's room, where she was lying in bed with a cold compress over her eyes, mourning her social standing. Mom, get up, Terence shouted, pulling the drapes open and letting the blinding afternoon sun flood the room. We are saved. I just got a call from a top-tier law firm. An investor wants to bail us out. He is paying off the whole debt. We get to keep the house. We get to keep everything. Viola sat up, the compress falling to her lap, her eyes wide with disbelief. Are you sure? Terence, is this real? It is real. Mom! Terence laughed, pulling her into a hug. The market finally turned in our favor. I told you I could fix this. I told you my connections would come through. We just have to go to the vineyard this weekend to sign the papers. Viola let out a long breath, her posture instantly correcting itself as the arrogance returned to her spine. She smoothed her hair and smiled that shark-like smile that appeared whenever she felt she had won. "I knew it," she said, her voice regaining its imperious edge. "I knew God would not let a family of our stature fall. We are blessed. Terence truly blessed. There is one condition, though," Terence said, pulling back his face, darkening slightly. The lawyer said, "Everyone on the trust has to sign the waiver. That means we need Darius." Viola's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, her lip curling at the mention of her cast-off son. She looked at her manicured nails, weighing the humiliation of asking him back against the terror of losing her status. The calculation took less than a heartbeat. "So we need his signature," she said coldly, standing up and walking to her vanity mirror. "That is fine. He is desperate. He is probably sleeping under a bridge right now. He will do whatever we say for a hot meal and a bus ticket home. Get me my phone." Terence handed her the device, and she dialed the number she had blocked days ago. She didn't hesitate. She didn't feel guilty. She felt entitled. She believed that Darius existed solely to serve the family's needs, regardless of how they treated him. The phone rang, and when the voicemail picked up, Viola didn't leave a request. She left a command, her voice sharp and authoritative, expecting immediate obedience. "Darius, this is your mother. Pick up the phone right now. We are going to Martha's Vineyard this weekend, and your presence is required. There is a legal matter that needs your signature to save the family estate. I know you are probably wallowing in self-pity somewhere, but you need to pull yourself together and get to the island by Friday night. This is your chance to do one last useful thing for this family, to actually contribute something of value instead of being a burden. Do not make me wait. Come home immediately and do what you are told for once in your life." She hung up the phone and tossed it onto the bed, turning to Terence with a satisfied nod. "Start packing the car. Terence, we have a victory party to plan, and tell Jessica to get ready. We are going back to where we belong." The journey to Martha's Vineyard was a masterclass in segregation orchestrated by my own mother, who decided that the family image required a tiered travel arrangement that would put a Jim Crow seating chart to shame. Viola sat in the back of her chauffeured Mercedes S-Class with the air conditioning blasting and her favorite gospel playlist drowning out her conscience, while Terence and Jessica posted selfies from the Delta Sky Club before boarding their first-class flight to Boston, where a private car would whisk them to the ferry terminal. They treated the trip like a victory lap for a race they had not only lost but cheated in, while Nia and I were relegated to the distinct misery of a Greyhound bus that smelled of diesel fumes and despair. I sat by the window watching the highway blur past as the bus vibrated with every pothole. Nia sat beside me, her head resting on my shoulder, and she had fallen asleep the moment we left the city limits. Exhaustion finally claiming her after weeks of double shifts and emotional abuse. She looked so young in her sleep, the dark circles under her eyes, the only evidence of the burden she was carrying for a family that treated her like a spare part. She was wearing jeans and a hoodie, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear. And it broke my heart, because she deserved to be flying private, not bumping shoulders with strangers on a 6-hour ride to hell. We had a layover at a dusty station in the middle of nowhere, and the heat was oppressive, sticking our clothes to our skin. Nia woke up, rubbing her eyes, and reached into her backpack, pulling out a wax paper bag that was greasy at the bottom. She opened it to reveal a single smash burger and a handful of fries that had gone cold hours ago. She broke the burger in half and tried to hand me the bigger piece. "Here, Darius," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "You need to eat. You haven't had anything since yesterday." I looked at the food and then at her. "I am not hungry." "Nia, you eat it. You need the energy for your exams." "I already ate," she lied, offering me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I had a big breakfast before Mom called. I am stuffed, really. Just take it, please." As if on cue, her stomach let out a low rumble that was audible even over the hum of the bus engine. She flinched, pressing a hand to her midsection and looking away in embarrassment, trying to hide the fact that she was starving because she had spent her last few dollars buying a ticket for me instead of food for herself. I took the burger, my hand shaking slightly not from hunger, but from a rage so intense it felt cold, like liquid nitrogen in my veins. I took a bite because I knew she wouldn't eat until I did, and then I forced her to eat the rest, watching her devour the cold meat with a hunger she tried to disguise as casual snacking. I pulled out my burner phone under the pretense of checking the time and angled the screen away from her so she couldn't see the contact name. I typed a message to Sterling, my attorney, and hit send with a thumb that wanted to crush the screen. Arrange the helicopter for the return trip, I typed. I do not care what it costs. I want the Sikorsky S-76, and I want it landing on the front lawn of the estate. When this is over, my sister is never taking a bus again. We arrived at the Vineyard Ferry terminal tired and aching, only to find that my mother had not left tickets for us at the will call window as she had promised. We had to scrape together the last of our cash to buy steerage passage on the cargo ferry, standing on the deck in the wind, while the wealthy summer residents sipped cocktails in the enclosed cabin above us. By the time we reached the island, it was late afternoon and the golden hour sun was bathing the oak bluffs in a light that made everything look expensive and untouchable. We had to walk the 3 miles to the estate because there was no one to pick us up and taxis were too expensive. The walk gave me time to look at the neighborhood, the rows of pristine Victorian cottages with their gingerbread trim and manicured hydrangeas, the symbol of the black elite that my mother worshipped so devoutly. Every house was a testament to generational wealth and exclusion, a fortress built to keep people like the current version of Darius out. When we finally rounded the corner and the family estate came into view, I felt a strange sense of dissonance. The house was magnificent, a sprawling 3-story structure with wraparound porches and a view of the ocean that cost millions. But it didn't look like home anymore. It looked like a stage set for a tragedy. A white Range Rover was parked in the circular driveway, and I saw Jessica standing on the front lawn with a ring light and a tripod. She was wearing a flowing white linen dress and a sun hat, looking every inch the lady of the manor she was, live streaming to her followers holding a glass of champagne that she had probably poured before she even unpacked. "Hey guys," she was saying to her phone camera, flashing a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Just arrived at the family summer home in Martha's Vineyard. It is so important to keep these legacy properties in the community. You know, we have to protect our heritage from gentrification. So blessed to be able to bring my children here to connect with their roots. Ignore the haters who say we are struggling. Real wealth moves in silence." She laughed, a tinkling fake sound, and panned the camera around to show off the ocean view, carefully avoiding the spot where the paint was peeling on the garage door, because they hadn't been able to afford maintenance in 2 years. Nia and I walked up the long gravel driveway, our shoes crunching loudly. But Jessica didn't even turn around. She was too busy curating her lies for an audience of strangers who didn't care about her. I walked past her, feeling a grim satisfaction knowing that the phone she was holding was likely about to be shut off for non-payment. Once I was done with them, I headed toward the massive front porch where a security guard was standing, arms crossed over his chest. He was a large man wearing a generic uniform that looked tight around the shoulders. He wasn't one of the usual island security detail. He looked like hired muscle, probably brought in by the new investor's legal team to ensure the property was secure before the signing. I walked up the steps, my head held high, ready to enter the house I had just secretly purchased, ready to end this charade and reveal myself as the architect of their salvation and their destruction. "Hold up," the guard grunted, stepping in front of me and blocking the path with a forearm like a tree trunk. "Where do you think you are going, pal?" "I am Darius Brooks," I said, my voice calm. "I am here for the meeting with the investors. My family is inside." The guard looked me up and down, taking in my dusty shoes, my wrinkled suit that had survived a bus ride and a ferry crossing, and my general appearance of exhaustion. He let out a short bark of laughter that sounded like a cough. "Yeah, right," he sneered, looking at me with the same disdain my brother had shown me. "Look, buddy, I don't know what kind of scam you are running, but the service entrance is around the back, and we are not hiring day laborers today. Anyway, this is a private event for the owners and their guests, and you definitely ain't on the guest list. I stared at him, the irony washing over me in waves. I was the owner. I was the guest list. I was the only reason he was getting paid today. But to him, I was just another bum trying to crash a party. I looked past him through the bay window and saw Viola and Terence inside, popping a bottle of champagne, celebrating their victory. Unaware that the man standing at their gate, being treated like a stray dog, held the deed to their entire existence. In his pocket, I stepped back, a smile slowly spreading across my face. Because this was perfect. This was the final indignity. The cherry on top of the sundae of disrespect they had served me. I would play the role one last time. Okay, I said, raising my hands in mock surrender. I will wait here. You might want to tell Mr. Brooks inside that his brother is here, though, unless you want to explain to the new owner why the signatory for the contract was left standing in the driveway. The guard hesitated, looking unsure for the first time, his eyes darting to the window where Terence was laughing. He unclipped his radio and muttered something into it, his eyes never leaving my face. I stood there waiting, while Jessica continued to preen for her camera, 10 feet away, oblivious to the fact that her reign as the queen of Martha's Vineyard was about to end in exactly 10 minutes. The guard finally stepped aside as Terence waved from the window with a dismissive flick of his wrist, likely enjoying the optics of his brother, waiting on the doorstep like a solicitor. I walked into the foyer and the blast of air conditioning hit me instantly, chilling the sweat on my back. Viola was waiting for me right inside the door, tapping her foot on the marble floor like a warden waiting for a prisoner. She didn't hug me, she didn't say, "Hello?" She just looked me up and down with a sneer of absolute disgust curling her lip as if my mere presence was staining her foyer. "You look like a vagrant, Darius," she hissed, keeping her voice low so the guests in the next room wouldn't hear. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and dragged me toward the butler's pantry. "You cannot be seen mingling with these people in that cheap suit. You will ruin the aesthetic of the evening." She reached into a closet and pulled out a white service jacket, one of the spares kept for the catering staff, and threw it at my chest. "Put this on. If you are going to be here, you are going to make yourself useful. We are short a server for the cocktail hour, and since you are asking for favors, you can work for them." I stared at the jacket, the white cotton stiff with starch, and realized this was her plan all along. She didn't just want my signature, she wanted my submission. She wanted to remind me of my place at the bottom of her hierarchy. I put the jacket on, buttoning it slowly, my hands steady, despite the rage burning in my gut. It was tight across the shoulders, a physical constraint to match the emotional one. "Good," Viola said, smoothing the lapel with a rough hand. "Now, take this tray and circulate. Do not speak to the guests unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact. And for God's sake, do not tell anyone who you are tonight. You are just help." She shoved a heavy silver tray laden with crystal champagne flutes into my hands and pushed me through the swinging doors into the main salon. The room was filled with the hum of expensive conversation, the clinking of glass, and the scent of money. The guests were Terence's potential investors and partners, men in bespoke suits and women in diamonds, people he needed to impress to resurrect his career from the ashes. I walked among them, a ghost in a white jacket, offering drinks to people who looked through me as if I were furniture. I saw Nia standing near the kitchen door, her eyes wide with horror. When she saw me, she started to move toward me, weaving through the crowd. Her face crumpling with the injustice of it all, she reached me and tried to take the heavy tray from my hands, whispering, "Darius, please take that off. This is humiliating. You are not a servant." I tried to smile at her, to tell her it was part of the plan, but before I could speak, Viola materialized out of nowhere, grabbing Nia by the elbow and spinning her around so fast she almost lost her balance. "What do you think you are doing?" Viola hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "Get back to the kitchen and check on the hors d'oeuvres. Stop coddling him. He is finally earning his keep, unlike you who almost cost us this house with your selfishness. Now go, before I embarrass you in front of everyone." Nia looked at me, tears swimming in her eyes. But I nodded slightly, telling her to go, telling her to wait. She retreated, the kitchen door swinging shut behind her. Leaving me alone in the shark tank, I moved toward the center of the room, where Terrence was holding court near the fireplace. He was flushed with adrenaline and expensive scotch, gesturing expansively with a cigar in one hand as he spun a web of lies to a circle of rapt listeners. "You have to have the instinct for it," Terrence was saying, his voice booming with unearned confidence. This liquidity crunch was actually a strategic maneuver on my part. I saw the market shifting and I knew we needed to pivot hard. That is why I brought in the new capital partner. He saw my vision for the property and the portfolio, and he begged to get in on the ground floor. Honestly, I had to beat the investors off with a stick, but I chose the one who understood the legacy of this family. I stood 3 feet away from him, holding a tray of drinks for the men he was lying to. And he didn't even flinch. He looked right through me, grabbed a fresh glass of champagne from my tray, without a word of thanks, and continued his monologue about his financial genius, ignoring the brother he had tried to sell for parts. And then I saw Jessica. She was standing by the piano holding court with a group of women laughing a little too loudly, her eyes scanning the room for drama. She spotted me, and a slow, cruel smile spread across her face. She excused herself from her group and began to walk toward me, her movements predatory and precise. She was wearing a red silk dress that she had probably charged to a credit card that was about to be declined, and she held a large glass of Cabernet in her hand. She didn't walk around me, she walked straight at me, her eyes locked on mine, daring me to move. But I couldn't move. I was the help. I was invisible. As she passed me, she didn't just bump me, she lunged her shoulder, checking me with the force of a linebacker while simultaneously flicking her wrist. The movement was so calculated, so practiced, that it almost looked like an accident to the untrained eye. But I saw the malice in her pupils. The tray tipped, gravity taking over as champagne flutes slid and crashed to the floor, but the real damage was the red wine from her glass. She had timed it perfectly, throwing the dark liquid all over the front of my white service jacket and splashing it onto the skirt of her own dress. The sound of shattering glass silenced the room instantly. "Oh my God!" Jessica shrieked, her voice piercing the sudden quiet. She jumped back, pointing a shaking finger at me, her face contorted into a mask of outrage. "You clumsy idiot! Look what you did! You ruined my dress! This is a $2,000 dress, you incompetent fool!" The room went deathly silent except for Jessica's histrionic gasps as she pointed at the red stains spreading across her hemline like a fresh wound. Everyone was staring at me with a mixture of pity and revulsion, as if I were a clumsy dog that had just soiled the carpet. Viola stepped forward, her face a mask of cold fury. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask if Jessica had bumped into me. She simply pointed a manicured finger at the floor. "Get on your knees," she commanded, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Clean it up right now, Darius, before it sets into the fabric." I looked at her, trying to find a trace of the mother who used to bandage my scraped knees when I was a child. But there was nothing there. Just a woman terrified that a wine stain would lower her property value in the eyes of the investors. She snatched a linen napkin from a nearby table and threw it at my feet. "Do not just stand there looking stupid," she hissed. "Get down there and scrub it off her shoes too. You ruined her evening now. Fix it." I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Nia. She had come back out from the kitchen, her eyes wide with panic, shaking her head silently, begging me not to do it, begging me to have some pride. But I looked past her to Terrence, who was watching with a smirk, swirling his drink, enjoying the show. I looked at Jessica, who was extending her foot, waiting for me to service her like a shoeshine boy. I slowly lowered myself to one knee, the movement stiff in the tight service jacket. The humiliation burned in my throat like bile. But I needed them to feel safe. I needed them to feel powerful one last time before I took it all away. I picked up the napkin and reached for Jessica's foot. She was wearing designer heels, red bottoms that cost more than my first car. As I dabbed at the wine on her shoe, she leaned down, pretending to inspect the damage, her hair falling forward to hide her face from the guests. So only I could hear what she had to say. She brought her lips close to my ear, her breath smelling of expensive Cabernet and malice. "You know, Darius?" She whispered, her voice a poisonous caress. "This is exactly where you belong. You were born to be a slave to this family. You exist to clean up our messes and make us look good. Do not ever forget that you are beneath us." The words hit me harder than any physical blow could have. It wasn't just an insult, it was a worldview. She truly believed that my purpose on this earth was to serve her ambitions, that my humanity was secondary to her comfort. I froze my hand gripping the napkin until my knuckles turned white. Then suddenly, there was a blur of motion. Nia didn't just walk over, she launched herself. She shoved Jessica hard in the chest, sending my sister-in-law stumbling backward in her high heels. Jessica shrieked, flailing her arms before crashing into a waiter, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres, sending mini crab cakes flying across the room. "Get your foot away from his face!" Nia screamed, her voice breaking with years of suppressed anger. "He is not your servant, Jessica. He is my brother, and he is worth 10 of you." Jessica scrambled up from the floor, her dress now stained with tartar sauce to match the wine, "You little brat," she yelled, lunging at Nia. Terrence stepped in, then grabbing Nia by the arm, roughly pulling her back. "Do not touch my wife," he shouted, shaking Nia. "You are out of control." I stood up, dropping the napkin. I stepped between Terrence and Nia, grabbing his wrist and squeezing it until he winced. "Let her go." "Terrence?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Do not ever put your hands on her again." The room was in chaos. Guests were whispering, clutching their pearls, moving toward the exits. Viola looked around, seeing her social standing evaporating in real time, seeing the investors checking their watches. She marched over to me, her eyes blazing with a hatred so pure it was almost blinding. She didn't hesitate. She swung her hand with all the force her vanity could muster. The slap cracked through the room, silencing the murmurs. My head snapped to the side, the sting radiating across my cheekbone. I tasted blood inside my lip. "Are you happy now?" Viola screamed, her chest heaving. "Have you made enough of a scene? You ruin everything you touch. Darius, you are a cancer in this family. I should have left you on the street where you belong." She marched to a side table where her purse was sitting and ripped out a folded document she had clearly prepared in advance. She shoved it into my chest, poking me with a sharp corner of the paper. "Sign this," she ordered, her voice shaking with rage. "Sign it and get out of my sight forever." I took the paper and unfolded it, my eyes scanning the legal jargon. It was a quit-claim deed, combined with a debt assumption agreement. It stated that Darius Brooks, voluntarily relinquished all future claims to the family estate and inheritance while simultaneously accepting full legal liability for any outstanding debts associated with the Martha's Vineyard property. Essentially, they were trying to transfer Terrence's bad loan onto me, while cutting me out of any potential profit. They wanted me to be the scapegoat one last time, to carry their sins into the wilderness so they could remain pure. "You want me to take the debt?" I asked, looking up at her. "It is the least you can do after ruining this night," Viola spat. "You have nothing to lose, you are already broke. Signing this helps your brother restart his life. Consider it your final contribution. Now sign it and leave." I looked at the pen she was holding out. I looked at Terrence, who was adjusting his cuffs, avoiding my eyes. I looked at Jessica, who was wiping crab cake off her dress with a look of murder on her face, and I looked at Nia, who was crying softly, shaking her head, begging me not to sign. I reached into my pocket, but not for a pen. I reached for my phone, checking the time. It was exactly 8 o'clock. Just then, a sound cut through the tension of the room, a deep, resonant chime that seemed to vibrate the floorboards. It was the front doorbell, but it wasn't a tentative ring. It was a long, insistent summons, the kind that demanded to be answered. Viola frowned, looking toward the foyer. "Who is that?" Now, she snapped. Did you order more food? Terrence? I didn't order anything, Terrence muttered, looking confused. The bell rang again, followed by a heavy, authoritative knock that rattled the door in its frame. Someone get that, Viola commanded, gesturing to the security guard, who had let me in earlier. The guard walked to the foyer and opened the heavy double doors. The sound of the ocean crashing against the cliffs below drifted into the silent house, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps on the hardwood. A man walked in. A man who took up space just by existing. He was wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than the car. Terrence drove. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and he carried a briefcase that looked like it contained nuclear codes. He was flanked by 4 men who were clearly not waiters. They were massive, wearing earpieces and suits that strained against their muscles, moving with the precision of a paramilitary unit. Viola stepped forward, her expression shifting from anger to confusion. "Excuse me, this is a private party. Who are you?" The man in the charcoal suit didn't look at her. He scanned the room, his eyes passing over Terrence, over Jessica, over the stunned guests, until they locked onto me, standing in my wine-stained waiter's jacket with a red mark on my face. He walked past Viola as if she were a ghost, ignoring her completely. He walked straight up to me and stopped, giving a slight bow of his head, a gesture of profound respect that sent a ripple of shock through the room. "Good evening, sir," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "I apologize for the delay. The ferry crossing was unexpectedly crowded, but we have arrived with the final paperwork and the security detail you requested." He turned then and signaled to the 4 bodyguards, who immediately fanned out, securing the perimeter of the room, blocking the exits, not to keep people in, but to control the space. Viola sputtered, walking up behind the lawyer. "Excuse me. You are talking to the help. My son is over there." She pointed at Terrence. "That is Mr. Brooks." The lawyer turned slowly, looking at Viola. For the first time, his expression one of mild amusement mixed with pity. "I am afraid you are mistaken, madam," he said, his voice carrying to the back of the room. "I am not looking for Terrence Brooks. I am looking for my client, the owner of this estate, and the holder of your debt." He turned back to me, opening his briefcase and pulling out a fresh, pristine document, placing it gently in my hands. "Mr. Darius Brooks," the lawyer said, handing me a gold fountain pen. "We are ready to execute the eviction whenever you give the word." The man in the charcoal suit did not just walk into the room. He occupied it completely, sucking the oxygen out of the space with a gravitational pull that made everyone turn and stare. He moved with the kind of silence that only extreme power and a team of very expensive lawyers can buy, and his eyes swept over the room with a clinical detachment that made the wealthy guests in their diamonds clutch their champagne flutes a little tighter, wondering if they were in trouble. Terrence scrambled forward, desperate to regain control of the narrative. He wiped his sweaty palms on his trousers and put on his best business school smile, extending a hand that was trembling slightly. "Mr. Sterling, thank God you are here. We have been waiting. My mother and I are ready to finalize the transaction immediately. We have the quitclaim deed right here prepared, just as we discussed." The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, didn't even break his stride. He looked at Terrence's outstretched hand as if it were a dead fish, offering nothing but a slight curl of his lip before stepping around my brother as if he were a piece of misplaced furniture. The rejection was so public and so absolute that Terrence froze, his hand still hanging in the air, his smile curdling into a grimace of confusion. "I require absolute silence," Sterling said, his voice not loud, but carrying a weight that slammed every mouth in the room shut. He signaled to his bodyguards, who took up positions at the 4 corners of the room, crossing their arms and staring straight ahead, like statues carved from granite, blocking anyone from leaving or entering. Terrence recovered slightly, his desperation overriding his humiliation. He hurried after Sterling, trying to get in front of him again, stammering, "Sir, please, we just need a moment to explain the situation. My brother here." He gestured wildly at me, standing there in the wine-soaked, service jacket with a red welt on my cheek. My brother is a bit of a mess, but he is ready to sign the debt assumption he is taking full responsibility, so we can clear the title for your client. Sterling stopped. Then he stopped right in front of me. He was tall, but I was taller, and for a moment we just looked at each other, the tension in the room ratcheting up, until it felt like a wire about to snap. Terence laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that grated on the nerves. Pay no attention to his appearance. Mr. Sterling. He is just the help for the evening. Well, he is family technically, but he is the useless one, the black sheep. We just need his signature, and then you can have him escorted out with the trash. Sterling turned his head slowly, looking at Terence with an expression of profound boredom. I am not interested in your commentary. Mr. Brooks, I am here to conduct business with the principal of this transaction. Exactly, Terence beamed, thinking he had won. That is me and my mother, we are the principals. Sterling turned back to me. He ignored the red wine dripping from my hem. He ignored the crab cake stain on my shoe. He ignored the fact that I looked like I had been in a bar fight. He looked me in the eye and he bowed. It wasn't a nod. It wasn't a casual greeting. It was a formal, deep bow from the waist. A gesture of deference that you only see given to heads of state or kings. Good evening, sir, Sterling said, his voice ringing clear in the silent room. I apologize for the delay. The transfer of the assets took a few moments longer than anticipated, but it is done. The funds have cleared, and the title is in your name. The room went so quiet, you could hear the waves crashing outside. My mother, Viola, let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking, a sharp, jagged noise of pure disbelief. She stepped forward, her face twisted in a rictus of confusion, trying to correct the reality that was unfolding before her eyes. Excuse me, she said, her voice shrill. You are making a mistake, Mr. Sterling. You are bowing to the waiter. That is Darius. He is a school teacher. He is broke. He is nobody. He is just here to clean up a spill. Sterling straightened up and turned to face my mother, his expression hardening into stone. Madam, I do not make mistakes, and I certainly do not bow to waiters. I am greeting my employer, the founder of the Athena Trust, and the sole owner of the Brooks investment portfolio. He gestured to me with an open hand, his voice dropping an octave, deadly, serious. I am greeting the man who just bought your debt, your mortgage, and this house. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Viola blinked once, twice her brain unable to process the information. Terence's mouth fell open, his eyes darting back and forth between me and the lawyer, trying to find the punchline to the joke. What are you talking about? Jessica screeched from the corner. Her dress still ruined. Darius doesn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He begged us for a place to sleep last week. Sterling reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding it up for the room to see. This is the wire transfer confirmation executed 10 minutes ago for the sum of $2.5 million, paying off all outstanding liens on this property. The funds originated from the personal account of Mr. Darius Brooks. He handed the paper to me and I took it, looking at the numbers, the proof of my victory. I slowly reached up and undid the top button of the white service jacket, my fingers steady, my heart beating a slow rhythm of triumph. I undid the next button, and the next, watching Terence's face turn the color of old milk as he realized that the brother he had tried to sell into debt slavery was actually the one holding the keys to his cage. I shrugged the jacket off, letting it slide down my arms. I didn't hand it to anyone. I didn't fold it. I balled it up in my fist, the fabric stiff with starch and cheap wine, and I threw it. It hit Terence square in the chest, leaving a wet red stain on his expensive suit before falling to the floor between us. I stood up to my full height, rolling my shoulders back, shedding the posture of the servant, shedding the weight of their expectations, shedding the years of being the disappointment. I looked at my mother, who was trembling, her hands clutching her pearls. I looked at Jessica, who was shrinking back against the wall, And I looked at Terence, who was staring at the jacket on the floor as if it were a live grenade. "I am not the help anymore," I said, my voice low and vibrating with power. "I am the landlord, and rent is due." I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. A sharp sound that cut through the stunned silence of the room like a pistol shot. And Sterling nodded to one of his associates who was standing near the wall by the integrated smart home control panel. He tapped a tablet and the massive 80-inch television screen mounted above the fireplace roared to life, casting a harsh blue glow over the dim mood lighting of the salon. Everyone turned to look, their eyes drawn to the screen, like moths to a flame. The image that appeared was high definition and crystal clear. It was a digital copy of a real estate transaction record, the kind of document that usually stays buried in county clerk offices, but was now being broadcast to the elite of Atlanta and Martha's Vineyard. The header read, "Commonwealth of Massachusetts Land Court Department," and below that, in bold, unmissable type, was the property address, the very house we were standing in. I watched as Terence squinted at the screen, his brain trying to reject what his eyes were seeing. He read the line regarding the transfer of deed and the satisfaction of all outstanding liens. But it was the line at the bottom that made his knees buckle. The line that listed the new legal owner of record. It did not say Terence Brooks, and it certainly did not say Viola Brooks. It read, "Darius Brooks, Holdings LLC, a wholly owned subsidiary of the DB Trust." A gasp went through the room, starting from the back where the investors were standing and rippling forward like a wave hitting the shore. My mother stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly, her hands trembling so violently that the champagne in her glass was sloshing over the rim, running down her wrist like tears. She could not comprehend it. She could not make the math work in her head. The son she had thrown out of a restaurant for being broke was suddenly the owner of her most prized possession. But I wasn't done yet. I nodded to the associate again, and the image on the screen changed. This time, it wasn't a document. It was a live login screen for a private banking portal. The logo of a major international wealth management firm appeared, followed by the biometric security check, which cleared instantly. The dashboard loaded, and there in the center of the screen in large green font was the total available liquid balance of my primary trust account, $85 million and 0 cents. The silence in the room shattered as Viola's fingers finally lost their grip on the crystal flute. It fell from her hand and smashed against the hardwood floor. The sound of breaking glass echoing the shattering of her entire world view. Shards of crystal scattered across her expensive shoes. But she didn't even flinch. She was paralyzed, staring at the number on the screen with a look of absolute horror. It wasn't joy. It wasn't pride. It was the terrifying realization that the power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been obliterated. Jessica looked like she had been drained of blood, her skin turning a sickly shade of gray beneath her makeup. She looked from the screen to me, and then down at her own dress, still stained with the wine she had thrown on me. She realized in that moment that the man she had treated like a germ, the man she had called a slave, could buy and sell her entire existence 100 times over. She took a step back, her heel catching on the rug, and she had to grab a chair to keep from falling, her arrogance evaporating into pure, unadulterated fear. I walked past Terence, who was frozen in place, his eyes locked on the bank balance, with a hunger that was pathetic to witness. I stepped up onto the small, raised hearth of the fireplace, directly beneath the screen, displaying my net worth. And I looked down at my mother. "You called me a stain on this family, Mom," I said, my voice calm, but projecting to every corner of the room. "You told me I was a failure because I chose to teach history instead of chasing money. You told me I had no value because I didn't drive the right car or wear the right watch. You were ready to sell your own daughter into debt. Slavery to save your reputation. Well, look at the screen. Mom, look at it." Viola slowly lifted her eyes from the floor to meet mine. And for the first time in my life, I saw fear in them. She was looking at a stranger, a titan. She hadn't bothered to get to know. You wanted money, I continued, my voice hardening. Well, here it is, 85 million. Dollars enough to buy this island, enough to buy your social club, enough to buy your respect, apparently. But you know what is funny, Mom? Today, I am the only person in this room with the power to decide who sleeps in a bed tonight and who sleeps on the street. I am the only one with the authority to say who stays in this house and who leaves. I gestured to the room to the guests who were watching with rapt attention, drinking in the drama like it was fine wine. You invited these people here to witness a business deal. Well, let them witness this. I am the owner of this estate. I am the holder of the debt. And I am the head of this family now, because I am the only one who can afford the bill. Viola made a choking sound, her hand clutching her chest as if she were having another heart attack. But I knew it was just the panic of a narcissist losing her supply. She looked at Terrence, desperate for him to fix it, to say it was a prank to do something. But Terrence was broken. My brother looked at the screen again at the $85 million, and then he looked at me standing there in my shirt sleeves, looking like a king. His face crumpled, the mask of the arrogant venture capitalist, sliding off to reveal the terrified little boy underneath who had gambled everything and lost. He realized there was no way out. He had no leverage. He had no cards left to play. He only had submission. Terrence's legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees right there on the rug in front of everyone. He didn't care about the investors anymore. He didn't care about his dignity. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, reaching out to grab the hem of my trousers, his hands shaking. "Darius, brother, please," he sobbed, his voice wet and pathetic tears streaming down his face, ruining his spray tan. "Listen to me. You have to understand. It was a test. I swear to God, it was just a test. I knew you had it in you. I knew you were special. We were just trying to push you to greatness to see what you were made of. I never meant those things I said on the phone. I love you, little brother. I love you so much. Please do not do this to us. We are blood. We are family. You cannot throw your own brother out on the street." He wrapped his arms around my legs, burying his face against my knees, weeping loudly, the sound echoing in the silent room, a disgusting display of cowardice and greed, masquerading as affection. He was begging not for forgiveness, but for access. He wanted to be close to the money he wanted to survive, and he was willing to debase himself completely to do it. I looked down at the top of his head, watching his shoulders shake with his fake sobs, and I felt nothing but a cold, distant disgust. He was talking about tests, but he had already failed the only one that mattered. I recoiled from his touch as if he were burning me. I took a step back and kicked my leg out, breaking his grip and sending him sprawling backward onto the floor. "Get off me, Terrence," I said, my voice ice cold. "Do not insult my intelligence with your tears. You do not love me. You love the access you think I can give you." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again. I tapped the screen and connected it to the room's audio system. "Listen closely. Everyone. I want you to hear exactly how much my brother loved me when he thought I was poor." The audio filled the room, amplified and crystal clear. Terrence's voice, slurred and arrogant, boomed from the speakers. "Look, if you are that desperate for cash, there are other options. You have got 2 kidneys, don't you? Or you could go down to the plasma center. Your body is not doing anything useful anyway. Might as well let them test some experimental drugs on you. At least then you would be contributing to society instead of leeching off the successful members of this family." The recording ended and the silence that followed was heavy with judgment. The investors looked at Terrence on the floor with open revulsion. He tried to speak, to stammer an excuse, but I cut him off. "And you, Jessica," I said, turning to my sister-in-law who was trying to blend into the wallpaper. "You talk so much about class and image. Let us see what you say. When you think no one is listening." I swiped to the next file, A video clip my private investigator had recorded 3 weeks ago at a brunch Jessica was attending with her socialite friends. The video played on the massive screen in high definition. Jessica was laughing, holding a mimosa. "My brother-in-law is such a loser," she said to her friends. "He actually thinks he is doing something important, teaching those kids. It is pathetic. Honestly, we are just waiting for him to mess up so we can cut him off completely. He is a stain on the family brand. I wouldn't let him sleep in my guest house if he was dying." Jessica gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, covering the lie she was about to tell. I watched the color drain from her face as her social standing evaporated instantly. The women she was trying to impress in this room were now looking at her like she was the help. "But I am not done," I said, my voice rising over the murmurs of the crowd. "Terrence, you want to talk about contributions? Let us talk about where the money really went. You told Mom you lost it all in a market crash, but that is not the truth, is it?" I signaled to the screen again, and a series of bank statements appeared highlighted in neon yellow. These are transfers from the family business account. Not to a crypto exchange, but to a private account in the Cayman Islands, under the name of a Miss Tiffany Davis. Jessica's head snapped toward Terrence, who was now curling into a ball on the rug, trying to hide from the light. "Tiffany Davis," I continued relentlessly, "is an exotic dancer in Miami, and according to these flight logs, my brother has visited her 6 times in the last 3 months, using the equity from this house to fund his little escapades, while his wife sat at home posting about family values." The scream that tore out of Jessica's throat was primal. She didn't look at me anymore. She looked at her husband with the eyes of a predator. She lunged at him, her nails aiming for his face. "You thief!" she shrieked. "You stole my life! You spent our money on a stripper while I was borrowing cash to keep up appearances. I want a divorce. I want everything." Viola sat in her chair, clutching her chest, watching her perfect family disintegrate into violence and shame. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for me to stop it, to save them. But I just watched, cold and unmoved. "I did not buy this debt to save you," I announced, my voice cutting through Jessica's screaming and Terrence's sobbing. "I did not come here to be your savior. I bought this debt to become your landlord. And as your landlord, I have the right to choose my tenants, and I choose none of you." I pointed to the door. "Get out, all of you. You are evicted. Effective immediately." Security moved in, grabbing Terrence by the arms and pulling Jessica off him. The room was a chaotic swirl of shouting and crying, but I stood still in the center of the storm, an island of calm. Then I turned slowly, my eyes searching the corners of the room, until I found the one person who hadn't said a word, the one person who was shaking, not with anger, but with fear and confusion. I looked at Nia, standing near the kitchen door in her simple clothes, clutching her elbows as if she were cold. "Nia," I said, my voice softening for the first time all night. "Come here." Nia stood frozen near the swinging kitchen doors, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck. Her hands were trembling violently, and she was pressing her back against the wall, as if she wanted to disappear into the plaster. She had watched her family disintegrate in a matter of minutes. She had seen her brother transform from a servant into a king, and the sheer magnitude of the violence and the revelations had left her in a state of shock. I walked toward her, and the crowd of wealthy investors and socialites parted for me, instantly moving aside with a mixture of fear and reverence. They no longer saw the stain on my shirt or the cheap shoes I was wearing. They saw only the $85 million and the power that came with it. I stopped in front of my little sister, and the silence in the room was heavy and expectant. Nia flinched when I reached out, but I just gently cupped her face with my hands, wiping away the tears that were streaming down her cheeks. With my thumbs, she was shaking so hard her teeth were chattering. "It is okay, baby girl," I whispered, my voice soft and meant only for her. "It is over. Nobody is ever going to hurt you again. Nobody is ever going to make you feel small or tell you that you have to sell your soul to save their reputation." I reached into the inner pocket of my trousers and pulled out a second leather portfolio. This one was slim and bound in soft blue leather, not the stark black of the legal documents I had used to destroy Terrence. I held it out to her, but her hands were shaking too much to take it, so I opened it for her. Look at this. Nia, I said, pointing to the deed inside, read the line right there next to where it says, owner of record. She looked down, her eyes swimming with tears, squinting to read the legal text. She gasped, a sound that was half sob and half scream, her hand flying to her mouth. It says Nia Brooks, she whispered, looking up at me with wide disbelief. Darius, what did you do? I transferred the title 10 minutes ago, I said, smiling at her. This estate is not mine. Nia, it is yours. You are the only person in this family who treated me like blood when I had nothing. You are the only one who offered me a place to sleep, when everyone else told me to die on the street. You sold Dad's bag to feed me. Nia, you tried to save me, so now I am saving you. I reached into my pocket again and pulled out a heavy black metal card. It was a Centurion card, the kind that has no limit, the kind that opens doors that are usually locked to people like us. I pressed it into her hand, closing her fingers around the cold metal. Your tuition is paid in full. I continued, my voice thick with emotion. I paid off your student loans this morning, every single cent, and I set up an endowment at your medical school so you will never have to work a double shift or eat instant noodles again. This card is for whatever else you need. Clothes, a car, a vacation, furniture for your new mansion. It is all covered. Nia stared at the card, and then at the house around her, and then at me. She let out a wail that broke my heart, a sound of pure release of a burden being lifted that she had been carrying for far too long. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder, and sobbing uncontrollably, holding on to me as if I were the only solid thing in a world that had turned liquid. I held her tight, rocking her, slightly glaring over her head at the rest of the room, daring anyone to make a sound, daring anyone to judge her emotion. Then a strange thing happened. The investors, the partners, the social climbers who had been drinking my brother's champagne, they started to clap. It started with one person and then swelled a ripple of applause, moving through the room. It wasn't out of kindness, and it certainly wasn't out of love for Nia. They were clapping because they respected power. They respected the move, the grand gesture of the victor, rewarding the loyalist. They were sharks, applauding a bigger shark. But in that moment, I didn't care why they were clapping. I only cared that for the first time in her life, Nia was the center of attention and she was winning. I pulled back and kissed her forehead. Look at me, Dr. Brooks, I said, using her future title. You own this island now. Head up. She nodded, wiping her face and straightened her spine, trying to stop shaking. She looked at the deed in her hands, and then she looked at the room, and I saw a spark of something new in her eyes. A realization that she was safe, that she was powerful. But the night wasn't over. I turned my attention to the doorway where my security team was waiting for my signal. Viola was slumped in her chair, looking old and defeated. Terrence was still on the floor weeping into his hands, and Jessica was standing by the wall looking like a cornered rat, her eyes darting around, looking for an escape route. I signaled to the head of security, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk. Remove them, I said, my voice carrying over the applause. Remove the trespassers from the property, immediately. They are not allowed to take anything that was not on their person when they walked in. The guards moved with terrifying efficiency. Two of them grabbed Terrence under the arms, hauling him up from the floor like a sack of flour, his feet dragging as he wailed, begging me to reconsider, begging me to remember that we were brothers. A third guard took Jessica by the elbow. She tried to pull away, screaming that she needed her purse, she needed her phone, but the guard marched her toward the door, ignoring her shrieks. And then there was Viola, the matriarch, the queen, who had lost her crown. She stood up on her own dignity, wrapped around her like a tattered cloak. She looked at me. One last time. Her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and respect. She didn't beg. She knew it was useless. She just walked toward the door. Her head held high even as the guard stepped in behind her to ensure she kept moving. "Get them out of my sight," I commanded, turning my back on them to face my sister. I heard the heavy front doors open, and the sound of the storm outside roared into the foyer, the wind howling like a banshee. Thunder cracked overhead, a violent boom that shook the house as nature itself prepared to punish them. I heard Jessica scream as the rain hit her, realizing she was being thrown out into a nor'easter in a ruined silk dress, with no car, no money, and no way home. I heard Terrence sobbing as the guards dragged them down the steps and threw them onto the gravel driveway. And then with a final resounding thud, the heavy oak doors slammed shut, sealing the warmth and the light and the wealth inside, leaving my mother, my brother and his wife, alone in the dark, facing the storm they had created. The rain was torrential now, a sheet of gray water that soaked through silk and wool alike, reducing high society to shivering misery. Viola stood on the gravel driveway, her wig plastered to her skull, her expensive makeup running in dark streaks down her face, looking like a melting wax figure of the woman she used to be. Terrence was huddled next to her, his arm throbbing from where the security guard had grabbed him, his arrogant posture completely collapsed into a slouch of defeat. Jessica was frantically tapping on her phone screen, her wet fingers slipping on the glass, trying to summon a ride to take them away from this nightmare. "This cannot be happening," she screamed, her voice thin and shrill against the wind. "My card is declined," it says. "Account frozen. Contact issuer." She looked at Terrence with wild eyes. "Fix it. Terrence, fix it right now or I swear I will leave you here to rot." "I cannot fix it," Terrence moaned, wiping rain from his eyes. Darius froze. Everything he owns, the debt, he owns the accounts, he owns us. They stood there in the dark, the warm, golden light from the mansion windows spilling out onto the lawn, just out of reach, taunting them with the comfort they had forfeited inside. They could see the silhouette of Nia, laughing, the silhouette of Darius standing tall. The world they used to rule was now a fishbowl they were locked out of forever. They had no car because the Mercedes had been repossessed as part of the asset seizure. They had no cash because their wallets were in the house. They had nothing but the clothes on their backs and the bitter taste of their own medicine. 6 months later, the sun was shining over Atlanta, but the heat was different for everyone. For Darius Brooks, it was the warmth of a new beginning. He stood on the podium of the newly inaugurated Brooks Community Learning Center, cutting the ribbon on a $20 million facility designed to provide free tutoring, coding classes, and financial literacy workshops to underprivileged youth. He wasn't wearing a designer suit today. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt, smiling as a group of children ran past him into the building, laughing. He had gone back to his roots, but with the power to make real change. He wasn't just teaching history anymore, he was making it. For Dr. Nia Brooks. The sun glinted off the hood of her brand-new Porsche Cayenne as she pulled into the reserved parking spot at Grady Memorial Hospital. She stepped out, looking impeccable in her white coat, her stethoscope around her neck. She had graduated top of her class, debt-free and fearless. She walked into the hospital, not as a struggling student eating instant noodles, but as a confident physician, ready to heal the world, knowing her brother had her back forever. But across town, the heat was oppressive and smelling of grease. Terrence wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. As the manager shouted at him to speed up the lunch rush order, he was wearing a paper hat and a grease-stained apron flipping burgers for minimum wage, the very job he had mocked his brother for allegedly needing. He had been blacklisted from every financial firm in the city, his reputation destroyed by the fraud investigation. He lived in a studio apartment with 3 roommates, and every time he handed a bag of food to a customer, he prayed they wouldn't recognize him. And in a small, dimly lit, subsidized apartment, On the outskirts of the city, Viola sat in a second-hand armchair, staring at a glossy magazine on her lap. The cover of Forbes featured a familiar face, Darius Brooks, the educator philanthropist who was changing the face of inner-city learning. She traced the line of his jaw with a trembling finger, remembering when that face used to look at her with love. Before she killed it, she reached for the phone, her hand hovering over the keypad, wanting to call to beg to hear his voice one more time, but she pulled back, knowing the number wouldn't connect, knowing she was blocked in every way a mother could be blocked. She was surrounded by the silence she had created alone with her pride and her poverty. Money does not change people. It just turns up the volume on who they really are. It amplifies kindness and it weaponizes cruelty. I lost a family that was toxic to its core. A mother who loved status more than her son. A brother who would sell me for a quick buck. And a sister-in-law who saw people as property. But in the ashes of that fire, I found something far more valuable than the $85 million in my bank account. I found my dignity. I found my sister. And I found the peace of knowing that I never have to beg for a seat at a table where I am not respected again. That is the real jackpot, and I am going to spend the rest of my life enjoying it. The most powerful lesson here is that money doesn't change people, it unmasks them. Darius's family proved their loyalty was tied to status, not blood. True family isn't defined by DNA, but by those like Nia who offer their last dollar when you have nothing. We learn that walking away from toxic relatives isn't cruelty, it is necessary self-preservation. You cannot buy genuine love, and sometimes the greatest victory is removing your access from those who only value your utility. Never let anyone treat you like an option when you hold the power to be their priority. If this story of justice resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more. Have you ever had to cut off family to find your peace? Share your story in the comments below.